ተግባር እንዲህ አፈ ላይ ይሸናሉ። ከዚያ ወዲህ ደህና አይደለሁም። እኔ ድንግል ነው የነበርኩት። ሆዴ ይቆርጠኛል፣ ያስታውከኛል።
ከ15 ዓመት ህጻናት እስከ 49 ዕድሜ በክልል ባሉ ሴቶች በተካሄደው ጥናት ከ120 ሺህ በላይ ሴቶች በፋሺስቱ አብይ አህመድ በአምባገነኑ ኢሳያስ ሰራዊቶችና በተስፋፊው የአማራ ኃይል አሰቃቂ ጾታዊ ጥቃት ደርሶባቸዋል።
What's happened to the women of Tigray, that's just a glimpse into the reality of the past 16 months. It's very tragic. We have a short poem that we'd like you to hear about why women in Tigray are not celebrating right now. And it will just be audio, you won't see video, but please take a listen.
Why should I celebrate March 8? Since 1908, the 114 years after, patriarchy still dictate. Tell me one good reason why I should celebrate. When violence, coercion, aggression, and murder happens every day, in every country, and in every state. What is there to be joyful, and what is there to celebrate? I can't trust anyone, whether at war or in peace. Remember last year, Sarah Everard was murdered by the UK police? I think of Yemen, Syria, Afghanistan, and now Ukraine. Children are crying, the elderly and the women. Look at the 16 months of Tigray in genocide, where women, girls, children, and everyone has no place to hide. When I've seen Tigrayans systematically persecuted, killed, thrown off a cliff, thrown to river, and died. And yesterday, I saw my own brothers, Tigrayan brothers, put in fire and fried. The world didn't help to end it. Why? I have no reason to celebrate, but cry. Hundreds and thousands wept in front of their father, opposite to the corpse of their dead brother, a standing grandfather. Hundreds of girls and women abducted, gang raped, enslaved, impregnated. In their womb, the hot metal rod, dirty cotton, plastic nails, all kinds of foreign objects have been inserted. When the full pain isn't known or fully reported, while Tigray is fully encircled, bombarded, starved, to International Women's Day and 495 days have been counted. I'm still shocked, in distress, and revolted. Ethiopia with a female president that never condemned or blamed the act of her state. Why should I celebrate? Amina Mohammed went to Magana from the United Nations, yet no global outrage, no stern action. Where is the Special Secretary to Conflict, Pramila Patel? The UN continues in old way and old fashion. What I see is a continuum of sexual violence and global aggression. Everywhere is demagogy, warmongering, propaganda, and pro-polarization. All amid all the Syria, Yemen, Tigray, Afghanistan forgotten. A new violence in Ukraine has also now begun. So this is today's March 8, this year's March 8, when all parts of Tigray are still in a dire state, engulfed by genocide in the world, consumed by hate. Give me one reason why I should celebrate. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerusalem. We most certainly share your tears and your sorrow. It's been 16 months of pure torture, and we've watch the world not move an inch to help the people of Tigray. Thank you for sharing that. Yesterday was a very heavy day for Tigrayans, as we saw literally on social media 5 minutes of the worst torture of human beings that you can imagine. I want to move forward with the program. First of all, I want to give condolences to Fissaha, who lost a family member. She learned of the passing of a family member just a few days ago, and so she's unable to be with us today. So our condolences to her, and we're grateful for all that she's done to speak up for the women of Tigray and the atrocities that have fallen upon them. I'd like to start with welcome remarks by Lamlam Hadgu. She is the head of the Tigray Women's Affairs Bureau. The Tigray Women's Affairs Bureau has been doing a violence assessment and documenting the tragedies that have befallen Tigrayan women. They've also been doing rehabilitation work in Tigray. As you heard in the video, women have been raped by, in some cases, dozens of soldiers, all back to back to back, to the point where their reproductive organs are being destroyed. Their sexual slavery is rampant. The Bureau has been a really strong voice for these women, and they have steadily been calling for justice on their behalf. So I'd like to welcome Ms. Lamlam Hadgu to the conference.
It's very cold. Don't go out.
While we wait for...
We can't hear you.
Sorry. While we wait for Ms. Hadgu to become available, I want to go ahead and just go to our next speaker so we don't waste valuable time, because there's so much that we'd like to discuss. She's not online yet, and if I'm not mistaken, she's joining us from out of the country. So I'd like to just go ahead with our next speaker, Dr. Sarah Tuwelde. Dr. Sarah is an assistant professor of forestry and food science at the Department of Food Science and Post-Harvest Technology in Magana University. As you all know, survivors have been left to grapple not only with the physical trauma of what has happened to them and the medical trauma of what has happened to them, such as HIV infection and fistula issues, but survivors are also left with many mental challenges and mental trauma of the violence. In many cases, their children and other family members were around and witnessed what happened to their mothers. This is all compounded by the fact that there were no resources in Tigray currently. The banks have been shut down. There's a lack of medicine, a lack of food due to the blockade, the intentional burning of farmlands by Eritrean and Ethiopian aligned forces. And of course, there was already a locust invasion in Tigray prior, and all of these things compounded have made life very difficult for survivors. So today, Dr. Sarah will discuss the situation of those survivors on the ground. Dr. Sarah, please join the stage. Okay. Sorry, everyone. We're having some technical difficulties with people who are trying to join. It looks like Dr. Sarek is trying to come in, but keeps being disconnected. They're both joining us from Magana directly. And so as you know, there's an issue there and we're not able to get in. We'd like to just take a brief minute to show a quick video before we bring in our next speaker. We just want to see if we can try and connect with Dr. Sarah or with Dr. Hadgu. If you just give us one moment. Okay, I am adapting here on the fly. We are going to just keep moving forward and see if we can get our sisters from Magana back connected. And in the meantime, I know who is ready because he is not facing the same technical difficulties. He is someone I'm a huge fan of. He needs very little introduction. But a big question is, are Tigrayans facing genocide? In 16 months, Tigrayans have been villainized, called traitors, thieves, devils, daytime hyenas, harassed, placed in concentration camps. Women have been the target of the cruelest forms of rape. And as we mentioned earlier, just yesterday, there was a 5-minute video of Tigrayans being burned alive by uniformed representatives and supporters of the Ethiopian government. No one is more qualified to answer the question about whether what is happening in Tigray is genocide than Professor Mukesh Kapila. He has more than 30 years of experience in promoting peace and promoting human rights in various NGOs, including the Red Cross and the UN. Professor Kapila is literally the whistleblower on the genocide in Darfur. And today he's with us to answer the question, is what is happening in Tigray a genocide? So I'd like to welcome to the stage Professor Mukesh Kapila.
Thank you, Millet, and I wish I could say I'm happy to join you, but it seems a strange thing to say that I'm happy to join you on this terrible topic. You can hear me, I hope, and I'm not having the same. Okay, good. What I've been asked to speak about is sexual violence and its links to genocide in the context of this particular event. Well, first thing to say is that sexual violence is very common in the world. A study from the World Health Organization some time ago showed that maybe 1 in 3 women in the world have experience of sexual violence at some time during their lives. And in some countries, in some continents, and Africa is notorious. Sorry, I don't know how I muted myself. So I was just saying that sexual violence is very common. According to a WHO study, maybe 1 in 3 women in the world have experienced it, and in some continents, and unfortunately Africa is in the vanguard on this, maybe 1 in 2. So it's common. The other thing we know about sexual violence, it comes in many forms. There is, of course, rape, but there are many forms of rape. We also know that it's the psychological effects of rape are as serious as any other effects there are. And we also know that in the context of wars, very often sexual violence is accompanied by violence. So the sexual violence in the context of conflict is not sexual, it is just violence. And certainly in my own experience of working with women affected by violence in war, it is quite clear that the multidimensional effect of sexual violence leaves a long and pervasive influence on the individual. Now, in this context, what we're talking, I'm not going to give you statistics about Tigray because there'll be others who already will speak about it. Tens of thousands of women have been affected. We don't know how many, but we certainly know that whatever estimates you have in Tigray, they're going to be an underestimate because by and large, these conditions are underreported, if you like. Women don't like admitting when they've been at the receiving end of violence. So in the context of thinking about genocide, what can we say? Firstly, obviously, sexual violence is a crime. So the first level of the crime is it's a crime under the domestic jurisdiction of any country. I don't think any country in the world doesn't have a law against it. That's the first thing to say. The second thing to say is that historically speaking, in the context of wars, it wasn't looked upon very seriously. It was seen as some kind of moral crime, an outrage to modesty, an outrage to, I mean, this very kind of, this term modesty. So whereas other forms of war crimes were looked on as much more seriously, sexual violence in the context of conflict was seen as a secondary crime, a less serious happening, traditionally speaking. And this possibly explains why it doesn't get as much attention as now, because that attitude still remains on part of in the world, basically. We also have to distinguish between crimes against humanity and genocide. Genocide is a form of crimes against humanity, obviously. Now, in a crime against humanity, terrible things happen, as we know, but that is not the same thing as a genocide, because you have to have an intention to actually eliminate someone as part of that. Sorry, my screen keeps on doing funny things. I hope you're all listening me. Someone is trying to show me their screen. Can they please go away and not share their screen? Because it distracts me. So what I'm saying here is, if we are talking about redress in the context of sexual violence in Tigray, we have to be clear as to what is it. Is it a war crime? Is it a crime against humanity? Or is it a genocide? Of course, it is all three. But the legal remedy has to be more precisely done if there is going to be justice. It is probable, with all the evidence that is accumulated, that it has been part of a war crime strategy, right? And at the same time, because it has been done on a mass scale, and what I observed for myself in Rwanda and former Yugoslavia, where I was involved, is the act of committing rapes on hundreds of women and thousands of women in rapid time can only be done if it is under organized command and control. If you were doing it randomly, meaning just bad men doing bad things to women, which happens everywhere in the world, it's not possible to commit so many, to rape so many women so fast. And very definitely, the stories of gang rape we are getting, and the stories of violence that we are getting in association with the sexual violence in Tigray points towards an organized, orchestrated effort, right? So the command and control aspects of that are really quite important. Now, so whenever these crimes are prosecuted, it's very, very important to get all the evidence of that, not just the evidence of terrible things having been done to thousands of women. On that, I think there's a lot of evidence already, video and others. But to go and tease out the chain of events that led this to happen and the extent to which it happened, and through the act demonstrating that it was an intentional act as opposed to the chaos and fog of war, is an important part of the evidence chain that has to be constructed. Now, fortunately, the law is improving and evolving. So what happened in the case of the tribunals on Yugoslavia, former Yugoslavia, and Rwanda was that the judges and lawyers, they extended the law in relation to atrocity crimes, in relation to crimes against humanity and genocide itself, so as to impute intent from the pattern of actions. I mean, you know, in the end, only Abe knows what's in his own mind, right? So, unlike the case of Hitler, where the Germans were logging and there were plenty of communications available that we could study afterward and say, right, these orders were given by these leaders of the Nazis to do this, that, and the other. Now, nobody, unless they're extraordinarily stupid, writes down orders nowadays, you see. And today, orders are all ephemeral. They'll be on email, they'll be on SMS messages. So unless they're preserved, very, very difficult to prove intent. But the law has been evolving ever since Rwanda times to indicate that in any reasonable appreciation of a situation, the nature and acts and the patterns of what's happening, the most likely probability of that happening is through an orchestrated action, which could only be done by someone in command and control. So that's a good thing in terms of the law that has gradually been extended out of the miseries of Rwanda and former Yugoslavia. And fortunately, this is what the International Criminal Court recognized, because the International Criminal Court's law, the ICC, came after the experiences of Rwanda and the former Yugoslavia, to recognize that sexual violence, with the patterns that you get, is a qualifying act for a genocide, as defined by the statutes of the International Criminal Court. Not just the statutes of the Genocide Convention, which we've had for 60 odd years, but by the more modern law of the International Criminal Court. And that's very important to appreciate. So in my mind, I'm kind of not sitting there forensically investigating or what, but certainly from what I have seen and heard and analyzed and cases I've heard, I would say there's an extremely high ground that what's going on in Tigray in relation to sexual violence is a war crime, is a crime against humanity, and a genocide. And it's possible to have all those things. It's possible for a crime to be all of that for the same crime, in a way. That's quite important to understand. The reason it's also important to understand why it's a genocide. Because what happens is not just the question of intent. Now, what genocide law says is that you're trying to alter the composition of a group of people, either by eliminating that group of people or changing their characteristics. So when you rape women and traumatize them on a systematic and mass scale, you're doing a couple of things. Firstly, you are impregnating the women, often the case. And what that means is you are changing the ethnic composition of the population if you do it on enough scale. So in Darfur, for example, where I was a direct witness to this, raped women who came to my office in Khartoum would tell me, one woman, for example, came and told me that she'd been raped in front of her husband and children and so on. And that, something like 10 or 20 soldiers raped her. And they were shouting that we will give you Arab babies. This was a woman from the Darfuri black groups. And the conflict at that time was between the Arab identified and the Black identified groups. So the intent there was to change the composition of the group, ethnic cleansing, we call it, in a way, literally in this sense, ethnic cleansing. Of course, no genocide in the world ever has worked, if you like to see. So you don't have to prove that it was successful. You don't have to impregnate all the women of Tigray to say that the composition has been changed. You have to do enough, and you have to imply and intend enough to be able to satisfy that particular criteria of altering the composition of the group. The second way you through rape you alter the composition of a group is that you change. So even if a woman doesn't get pregnant, she is so completely traumatized, so completely spaced out. I mean, I as a man, I can only very feebly understand what a woman must go through, and men can only be ashamed of this. So her womb, I mean, according to psychologists, then her womb is no longer available. So even if she didn't become pregnant, and even if she wasn't gang raped, but she went through this experience and she emerged from the other end, she's a changed woman. She's not necessarily, inverted commas, emotionally available to resume normal membership of the community of which she's a part, right? She is forever. So her womb is literally emotionally not available. Remember, the word womb comes from, traditionally, it came from basically the emotions, in a way. I mean, our ancient physicians, obviously they were very misogynistic. They thought that a woman's kind of life and soul rested in her womb. We know this is this is never true, but the cultural idea, the emotional idea, still has a very powerful hold on society. So a rapist does two things. One, rapes a woman, impregnates her, or gives her a disease, or subjects her to physical violence. So as we heard from testimonies, that we operated upon, or as I saw in many cases, because female genital mutilation is also very common in parts of North Africa, we've got huge traumas, and the woman becomes sexually infertile, apart from not emotionally wanting sexual relations subsequently. So the womb is unavailable apart from being damaged. Another way that this becomes a genocide is that the symbolic effect it has on society. So, for example, when your women have been penetrated, violated, humiliated, so are you as a man violated, and so are you as a man also penetrated, in the sense that your complete sense of your ego, and I don't want here to get into egoistic relations in men and women, I'm just trying to make the point that it has such a huge effect in terms of the relationship between men and women subsequent to the event. And and it will require men of extraordinary understanding. And there are such men, and we must salute them, and I'll come to why I'm talking about this in a minute. So it doesn't matter, it's not about 100,000 women being raped. The effect of that is much greater beyond that, and it is there for a very long period of time. I think you get my point. The other point I want to make in this is that, and I've seen this at first hand, for example, with the Rwandan survivors of rape, and my God, that was on an industrial scale. That I saw this in Goma, in eastern Zaire at that time. All the Rwandan refugees, women who came out lying there mute for weeks at a time in the hospital I was at. They're injured, they're traumatized, that is obvious. But as these women told me, they are then secondary victims of their own society. So as I saw for myself, especially, and by the way, not just Rwandans, but in the DRC, I think some people have said that the Congo is actually the rape capital of the world, as certainly it has been in the past. What happens is these women may get over, they might get sewn up, they might even recover, they might even, etc., etc. And certainly I want to pay tribute to the number of women I've seen who have gone through awfulness of extreme order, but who seem somehow to have been able to grow out of it in some way. But the men in their lives, their families, actually victimize them second time around. You've been raped. Fine. I wish you had died. It would have been better for you to have died. Are you sure you didn't encourage them? Anyway, you are spoiled, you are soiled, etc., etc. And those are attitudes of men and their attitudes of our society. So the woman survivor becomes a double victim. So you're adding then insult to the injury. Let me conclude by talking first about health, and secondly about what do we do in terms of going forward. And obviously we've talked a little bit about the law. It's much more complicated than that. And sometimes when I talk with lawyers, I can hardly control my patience, because while people are kind of picking nits between, is this a genocide or is this a crime against humanity or is this just old-fashioned rape? I say, well, I mean, imagine if you were the receiving end of a rape, and imagine the lawyers arguing and saying, well, yours is only just ordinary rape. It's not a genocidal rape, imagine. And so it's extremely important we don't get narrowed down into that discussion either. However, I'm just sharing with you some of the debates and the challenges that are there in the law, which is fortunately improving. Now, coming to the issue of healthcare, I think services for women and girls, and by the way, even some men who have been traumatized in this way, it requires special provision. You can't, sexual and reproductive health services, they have to be done not through integration in the mainstream of healthcare, because that's tantamount to invisibility. It needs specialized, focused, dedicated services and dedicated follow-up. So as services are set up, or not much at the moment because access is an issue, we have to remember, certainly in my experience, sexual and reproductive healthcare and mental healthcare, in response to these situations, they require highly specialized and highly targeted and personalized services. They can't just be provided by the run-of-the-mill health clinics and bit of family planning here, bit of HIV treatment there, etc., etc. That's, I think, the only point I'm going to make. Second point I'm going to make is that in terms of is relief of trauma, it's implication of what I've already said about the women being second. Please, let us see if we can educate Tigrayan society. And let us see if we can educate Tigrayan men to not disrespect the women who have been sexually violated, right? And somehow find it within them to rise above all this. And that will only happen if we discuss it openly, if men take a leadership position in this. Women talking about women's problems to other women isn't going to get us anywhere at all, to say it bluntly. And I am, quite frankly, completely disappointed by the women in the international system, whether it is a Deputy Secretary General or whether it's a special representative for sexual violence, and all these are good women and so on. But in my experience, women leaders have shown the least leadership and have betrayed them. And I often wonder late into night when I can't sleep, why Is it that they're betrayal? Why do I get so emotional about this? And I feel ashamed about this because my kind are going around doing these kinds of things. And I can't understand why women are not, they're activists and feminists who do those kinds of things as part of human rights organizations and so on. But I do not see the outrage that the women leaders are bringing in this area. And that applies not just to UN women leaders, but there are African women leaders in parliamentarians, there are in many institutions and so on and so forth. And this, quite frankly, is disgusting in a way. And they need to be called out. They are betrayers of their fellow in a way, and they need to be called out. They are betrayers. There is a program here, other than calling the women out. There is a program here, other than calling the women out. Thousands of women. By the way, now sexual trafficking is going on in Ukraine. Things. Millions have left Ukraine and they're sitting in Poland and Romania and various places. I hope to be going there shortly. I wish I could come to Tigray, by the way. If somebody could let me into Tigray, I would move from where I am now in Dubai straight. I would catch a plane, if you like. But pending that, I'm hoping to go to Ukraine at least. Now, we have to find a way of ensuring that the social stigmas and taboos are removed so that these women come out and flower again. And because they are the engines of their own recovery. And what I've seen with my own eyes in the worst situations is how extraordinary resilient. I mean, I've spoken to women and said, my God, all this happened to you. How can you even smile? Surely you must be totally ruined. Don't you want to disappear under the table and never emerge? But no, they're actually rising up and wanting to get on with their lives and live their lives and so on. So let us find these women survivors who are heroes and try and make men heroes who can counterpart with these women heroes. For example, the husbands of these men. For example, the fathers of these men, the sons of these men. And to say, yes, these things happen, but we are not going to be victims. We are future champions. Let me stop here.
Professor Mukesh Kapila, it is always an honor and a privilege to listen to you speak. Your authority on the subject of genocide is unmatched in the world. So we thank you for giving us your input today. I want to, just a few things you said that really stuck with me. When you talked about altering the composition of a group of people or attempting to, I just want to remind people of the things that were said to Tigrayan women. Things were said like, we are here to Amharanize your blood. Things were said like, there was a woman who asked her would-be rapist, why are you doing this? You're my brother. And he said, well, you're not the problem, but your womb is our problem. These are the kinds of things that were said to Tigrayan women. I'll never forget too, once, Professor Mukesh, when you said attacking women is attacking the essence of a people. And that is certainly what has happened. I won't keep going because Dr. Sarah has joined us from Magana, and I know her connection is really shoddy. So I want to bring her back in. And just as a reminder, she is going to talk about the survivals who are left with mental trauma and talk a little bit about their situation and their challenges and the way forward. So I'd like to welcome Dr. Sarah. Oh, okay, I got a little bit ahead of myself. Lemlem is also here. So we're actually gonna bring Ms. Hadgu on so she can talk about, give her remarks from the Tigray Women's Affairs Bureau. Lemlem, we can't hear you. Maybe you're on mute. Lemlem Hafte, if you can hear me, please unmute.
Yeah, Melita, she's joining in as Sarah. So if you can unmute her, I cannot unmute it from here. We're trying. She's just Sarah, not my full name. And I'm joining as my name. Sorry, it's just we're using. Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Right.
Yes, if our tech support could unmute, that would be wonderful.
Okay, thank you. More the عالم لخوي معتي دك أنستيو مسارات كيركم أو ذا دالهم وفلاي دما ناي تبعات دك أنستيو حسوا أو تجراي عمل كيتو أو بمعدامي تسمعني تحواس قديمة قلت إدالي تزلنا يخونتا تحت ربي له نمجلات زي أتاو تقعات كمتي تقلت زنورة قدميلو أبانا ترى أتاو تقعات كم زي كنا كلنا نردوي أتاو تقعات بدق توعتيو راح تفت أما زي كنا دق توعتيو بعد نجريم لما هتصنعنا تيملا زي بقع مردات لنا إيه من ناوزي زبل نجر يبلون at least was it was لهم مسمار كالسي فيستال كما هتصنعنا نكوت إنكلو بعلو ألنا يمردات ساتهم على شفافن ويمكرجن بأخول مردات لنا يزي كونه تباهيلو حزب تግራይ ንምጥፋእ ማህፀን ትግራዋይቲ ምብልሻው ዝብል ሒዞም ዝገበርዎ እዩ ብድሕሪኡ ሕዚ ንሕና ከም ቢሮ ጉዳይ ደቂ ኣንስትዮ እመት ሓበሪት ኮይነ ክምደብ ከለኹ ኩሉ ግዜ ቀሲልና ኢና ንሕና ተንዝርካበን ተንዝመጻኳስ ምንም ክንገብረለን ንኽእሎ ነገር የለን በጀት የለን ዝብላዕ ጠሚኒ ኢላ ትመጽእ ሞዴስ ደልያ ትመጽእ ምንም ክንገብረለን አይካልና ሰኒ በኸያ ንሕና እውን ንበኪ ግን ድማ ንሕራነ በኸያት እና ብጣዕሚ ኣብ ኣጸጋሚ ኩነታት እየን ዝርከባ ዘለዋ ብፍላይ ድማ ምስቲ ዕፅዋን ክባን ናይ ሕዚ ድማ ብፍላይ እንተን ተጠቕዓ ንኩሉ ህዝቢ ትግራይ ዋላ እንትኾነ ግን ድማ ብፍላይ እንተን ተጠቕዓ ጥኑሳትን ሓራሳትን ኣብ ዝኸፍአ ኩነታት እየን ዘለዋ እዚ ንሕና ክንብሎ ንደሊ ንስኻትኩም እውን ትሰርሕሉ ኣለኹም ኢኹም ብዘጋጣሚ እዚ ንዞም ኣብዚ ዝሳተፉ ዘለዉ ሰብኣውነት ተጥቂዕዎም ናይ ሰብኣውነት ጉዳይ ናይ ህዝቢ ትግራይ ጉዳይ ክኸውን ኣይኽእል ንሕና ባና ዝበፅሐ ኣብ ዝኾነ ይኹን ህዝቢ ክገጥም ኣይንደለን ንምንታይ ሰብ ክቡር ስለ ዝኾነ ዋላ ኣብ ዝኾነ ይኹን ክብል ከለኹ እቶም ንዓና ኣድሚዮም ናዮም ከም ህዝቢ ከጥፍኡና ይደልዩ እዮም ንብሎም እውን ከም ህዝቢ ፈርጅና ይንፈልጥን ክንፍርጅውን ይግባአን ኣብኣቶም እውን ክበፅሕ ይግባአን እንኳን ኣብ ካሊእ ስለዚ ሰብኣውነት የጥቅዐኒ እዩ ዝብል ኩሉ ኣብዚ ምርብራው ትክክል እዩ ተጀማመረ ስራሕ ኣሎ ከምዚ ንሪኦም ዘለና ካብ ወፃእተኛታት ይኹን ካብ ሙዚቀኛታት ይኹን ብብዙሕ መንገዲ ክግለጽ ጋዜጠኛታት ይኹን ከጋውሕዎ ይምክሩ ኣለዉ እዮም ግን ክንድቲ ዝድለ ኣይኮነን ካልእ ትረፍ ገባር ትግራዋይ እንታይ ኮይኑ ዓለም ዘይብል ገባር የለን ምንም ዘይፈልጥ ምክንያቱም ዓለም ከምኡ ገይሮ ይርድኦን ህዝቢ ትግራይ ዋላ ይመሃር ንቑሕ እዩ ዓለም እሱቅ ክብለና ይግባአን እዩ ዝሓስብ ከምኡ ክብለካ ከሎ ንሕና ተምሃርናት ዓለም ትበሃል ንሪኣ ስለ ዘለና መልሲ እውን ይጠፍአናና እዚ ሓሲብኩም ፅቡቅ ምንቅስቃስ ትገብሩ ኣለኹም ኢኹም ሕዚ እውን ግን እንብሎ ነገር ንሕና كندي مسموته يهزب تجراي عالم كبزحب كندي ناي مستقف أنا إنا ورد خنا تفقكمينا يلوميم بوتي دراما صرح نازل ناي فدرال منجستي كسددي أقليم الشيء إقليم أنت بلنا إقليم أنت بلنا عفار كالكيلونا بزو عفار يخلق لنا نعنا من البات من محدار عفار ناي فدرال أكال سلازخنا خلق لنا يخلي مهنياتهم حدا إيو علامة الليت خلق لنا يخلي هو هزو محران عنا يخلق لنا مهنياتهم كمان هزبي إلنا إنا نأمن توم فانو قزعم زعز بهال هزو محرا ونسألات خوينا مزني هو يكوننا نمزلنا اللي تنا محرا يكوننا نمزلنا هزو محرا قلنا عنا يخلق لنا أمحرا خلقي لكم عفار خلقي لكم نالح دون تدراما يقصل يزلو دراما بز قصل وصل دما نحنا يمررنا له هزو بزحيو زساق أزلو بحادي يكون بخلطة بزخوانا يكون مخنياس عصوازي بتزيد فتحهم نحنا سؤالنا ينموتن أرنا سلزدلنا يكوننا ناتو دلينا يونا ينفلت سو أو ناس سمع عسر سو أو ناس سمع هزوي نتقرنا تيقدمن سلازي أنا حلفوز دلي علم حزوون كسمعنا اللو هزو تقراي بعصوا بفلاي دما دك نستيه تقراي بعصوا أو حما كنتاتنا نركب زي عصوازي كونه تباهيلي سلام دلينا يقولوا بحدقة سلام يندلني نحنا قدميا سلامينا نقول سلام النبل جن فرحت كنا يكوننا نفلتنا ناوخن أتوس لزين دلينا أو قرنت كن أتوس لزين دلينا حزون قدميا نريء سلامين تقولنا جن بتأميت بقاري موتو نزبلنا جن سئلنا أين موتن إن زي حلف زدل ما الأختي أبزي حياة فينا كرتا بزخانة عريق الميتنا زلوا نتجوروا زلهم كأسد ما نحنا ونبزو فينا نكالسينا زلنا متهزونا سخاتهم سلت كالسو زلهم النظام وساتن يتاتون كلهم دعمي إذا مسكن يغني لي.
Wow, that was an incredibly powerful message from Haftana Lemlem Hadgu. And I just want to just briefly summarize what she said as much as I can in English. And it's hard I wish I could word for word tell you what she said, but she spoke about the trauma that the women are facing and reminds us that women had hot rods inserted into their bodies to destroy the reproductive organs, that plastic and trash and other materials were removed, like glass, were removed from internally from women's organs. This was all done intentionally. And she says the women need help, and it's not even just the medical things, but also food and basic things like sanitary pads. She says that they're constantly, women come and they're in tears, but they're not just tears of pain, they're tears of survival. So she says she knows that the message is being put out into the world, but it's still not loud enough. Why is the world silent? And she ends by saying, we're asking for peace and we want to avoid war, but we will not die silently. We are still in the dark, but we are still fighting, and please continue to fight for us. Just a really beautiful message. I wish I could translate everything word for word. Let me just see if Sarah is available. I believe she is, but the connections are funny. So let me see. Is Sarah available? Sorry. All right, let me wait as I hear from my tech team about whether or not Dr. Sarah is available. And if not, our next speaker is equally, I see Sarah on the screen. Is she available? Can someone on tech let me know if Sarah is available? If not, I will move. She is, great. Okay, I will turn it over now to Dr. Sarah, also joining us from Magana.
Thank you, Melita. Thank you. Indeed, I thought we managed to catch the last speaker, and all that was said, I mean the last speaker before Lamlam, all that was said is really moving, and a lot of what I'm going to be presenting was already said by Zero Lamlam and that one, and I hope I will be able to do justice to this. Thank you. So I would like to talk about, can you go to the next slide? Melita, are you controlling? Yeah, thank you. Okay. So this is the presentation outline. I'll be talking about the situation on the ground now, and I will also talk about what efforts are on the ground. I will try to see with you what we are doing and where we would like to collaborate and work with all of you. And also, we will be looking at challenges we're facing to do these things. Thank you. Next. Okay. So the situation basically is that the war in Tigray has devastated everyone, but the devastation with the gender-based violence and related issues is harder. We will try to explain why here. Survivors are left with a lot of physical problems, STI, physical challenges like back pain and other things, and also related kidney, heart, and other problems. And they're also faced with livelihood damage that was done due to their looting and also their limited capacity to function as they were functioning before. As we saw from the One-Stop Center data, prior to the war, we did have some gender-based violence in Tigray, but the amount that we see, the number of survivors coming to these centers, though it's a trickle and very limited due to many reasons, which we will explain later, it is actually more than threefold. So, and from the One-Stop Center data and also the Safe House data that we have of women, survivor women who have come, we see that over 30% of these women were gang raped. And as you can understand, when there's gang raping, the physical and emotional trauma is quadrupled or more. There were nearly 60% pregnancies. STI combined was around 16%, and hepatitis B was around 4%. And HIV, though many of the survivors were tested before the 3 months was up, was still 3%, which is very, very high. And this leaves a huge burden in the society, but also with the survivors. Next. So, as we can see, the issues are unavailability of resources to cater to these people, but unawareness of GBV survivors of services that are there. Ethiopian-wide study showed that only 24% of women come forward to talk about their problems and seek help. And limited transportation, the siege, and all the combined problems that come with it, lack of access to bank savings, looting that happened, and inability to find again resources to come and travel to these centers, and of course the very devastating destruction of health services that was conducted Tigray-wide. Thank you. Next. So we talked earlier about the physical problems that these survivors face. Now we'll try to talk about some of the psychological problems that these survivors are facing. For example, an 80-year-old woman was raped by Eritrean soldiers. This woman is supposed to be in her retirement age where she should be finding peace, but she's not. When she came to the center, she was bleeding for many months, and she had problems which she was treated for. But then she asks continuously, why did this happen to me? What did I do in my life to deserve this? And what is life? What is worth of my life? Why am I alive? Why should I stay alive? So those kinds of things we hear repeatedly. Next. A 26-year-old was raped. She was pregnant, she had a child, but her family have rejected the child. Here I'd like to note that many families have actually embraced rape children, and they are bringing them up as their own, because at the end of the day, the mother is flesh and blood, and despite all the problems that were there, the child is not actually to blame. But some families find it very, very hard to accept children born of rape. Therefore, they are rejected. And this mother is finding it very hard to support herself, very hard to detach herself from her family, but then she doesn't have a choice. She's being told to abandon the child. Some survivors say, I feel worthless, I have no value, my virtue has gone, and so on. And many survivors actually don't want to come to centers and stay there, get services, because they have family responsibilities, or because they fear stigma, or many other problems. But overall, you can see the psychological burden that these women carry is really huge. Next. So the average survivor of gender-based violence, especially sexual gender-based violence in Tigray, has seen a loved one be killed in front of her, has been beaten and humiliated, sexually assaulted, raped and sodomized, sometimes raped or sodomized through forced incest, and also sometimes raped and sodomized in front of her family. Next. A lot of these survivors have been forced to abandon their lifelong commitment, their marriages. Some have religious commitments like nuns, wives of priests and sheikhs, girls who were keeping themselves for their marriage or whatever life they would be having. But they feel violated, they feel unclean, they feel disrespected, and they feel that they were forced out of the life choice that they had made. Their properties and livelihoods were destroyed. They have gynecological related problems, they have physical injuries, they carry STI, they suffer from psychological problems. Next. They have unwanted pregnancies and children from rape, which complicate their family lives. And they have preserved, they have been prevented from getting help during the war by soldiers who were surrounding them, and now by the siege because they cannot go and seek help. And they have been forced to divorce from their partners and so on. They have also not only had things done to them, they have also seen other things done to their loved ones, their family, their relatives, like, for example, extrajudicial killing and gender-based violence killing of targeting young men, rape of their loved ones, killing of their loved ones, and death or imprisonment of sex slaves as they were captured and kept as sex slaves, and peers of theirs that have had to kill themselves because they were told they were pregnant or they had HIV and they couldn't see a way out. So overall, they are suffering.
I think we lost the connection. Of course, she was joining us directly from Magana, and so the sound seems to have been disrupted. We were toward the end of her presentation though, so unless we can get Dr. Sarah back, I will do just a little bit of summary. Yeah, I think we've lost her. First of all, I want to say that we will be taking some questions, hopefully at the end of the presentation, if there's enough time. So please send your questions in. You should be able to, I know the chat is not enabled, but you should be able to send a direct question either through the chat or through the question. There should be a question link, so you can do that as well. We will take your questions toward the end of the presentations. A couple things that just really stood out for me was that Dr. Sarah said an 83-year-old nun or an 83-year-old woman was raped. She said a nun was also raped separately, and that she's having nightmares. These are the kinds of things that the women of Tigray are dealing with and have little support around because of the wholesale destruction of healthcare facilities in Tigray. Another one I think is something that Professor Mukesh also commented on earlier, and that is, how are we going to integrate people who have been, the women and the children who were subjected to this such awful treatment. She said a 26-year-old woman had a child and the family rejected the child, where it's easy for us to be in a position of judgment. But I think we should withhold that judgment and just think about how are we going to peacefully integrate the children who were brought into this world in such a violent way. I think it's something for Tigrayans to think about, but I also think it's something that we need support around. So I don't think we have Dr. Sarah anymore, but her presentation was incredibly helpful in shining light on what the women of Tigray are dealing with. I'd like to move on to our next presenter, Dr. Sintayo Fissaha. The gravity of conflict-related sexual violence, it just can't be overstated. We've heard the stories, and we just heard as well from Dr. Sarah about women who are afraid to come forward because they're afraid of being ostracized. That tells you that there are many more impacted that we will never hear about. Dr. Santoya, we're really honored to have you up next. She's an accomplished professor currently in Canada, and as a researcher, she's been involved in various projects focusing on aid, growth, poverty, gender, and land. So today, she's going to give us an overview of the gravity of conflict-related sexual violence. So I'd love to welcome Dr. Sintayo to the stage. And you might be muted if you've started speaking. We see your presentation. If tech can help us out, maybe unmute. Dr. Sin.
Okay.
Okay, great. There you go.
Sorry for the technical issues. I couldn't unmute it. I'm very sorry. Thank you for the brief introduction. And and I think my presentation is a little bit covered by some of the previous presenters, but there are some more, just it gives us a glimpse of what is the gender-based sexual violence and rape in Tigray. So here we have on the front, I just put the map with the intent of where Tigray is. I guess some of us might be aware, but to some, maybe like sometimes it's a little bit odd to hear that a government declaring war to its people. So Tigray is part of Ethiopia, the northern part of Ethiopia. And it is a little bit unheard that a government declaring war on its people. Saying, let's proceed to the next slide, please. Here I have an outline of the presentation, and yes, my slides have been organized in the way that give us a little bit picture of what the gender-based sexual violence and rape in Tigray. So we will see a little bit of what the civil war in Tigray and its effect, the definition of the terms, and then the rape and sexual violence in Tigray and its effect, the trend, its nexus, rape, war, health nexus, and genocidal rape in Tigray, impacts of gender-based sexual violence and rape. And then finally, we'll say a little bit of the recommendation. Yes, here I have definition of the key terms. I actually included this part just to make clear that what is the type of the gender-based violence and rape in Tigray. I think most of us might be familiar, but just to give a glimpse of what's the definition we are using in order to explain the term and discuss about the gender-based violence in Tigray. So here, gender-based violence, sexual violence is any act that results in or likely to result in physical, sexual, psychological harms that has a lot of or multi-impacts on the individual, on the family, and on the community at large. So when we try to look at the gender-based sexual violence in Tigray, the direct act, and its impact is severe, and it's deeper, it's broader, and it has a lot of complex and impacts on the individuals and the community and the society at large. We have also rape as a weapon of war. We strongly believe the war in general, and then the gender-based sexual violence on specific is more used as a weapon of war in Tigray. And it is used as a mechanism to humiliate the society, to humiliate, especially the rape is to humiliate the woman, and to wipe out the community, in particular ethnic groups. In this aspect, gender-based sexual violence or the rape is not used only for sexual gratification, but it has been done in front of the family, in the public and the private, in front of the family. We have also heard that families have been asked to rape their own family. So, and then in the process, there are a lot of people, victims who have been lost their life. And in addition to that, there are also other acts that makes the war in Tigray genocidal. And what is genocidal? Causing the killing. Okay, civil war in Tigray. I just included this slide with the objective of making things clear, not to explain the war, but to associate the relationship between the gender-based sexual violence and the war. And here there are a lot of stories that the war has been started by Tigray army or TPLF, but there are also facts that indicate the war has been started by the federal government. And the evidence for that is pre of the war, the prime minister has been said that if election ever held in Tigray, mothers will cry, children will die. There was a time in the House of Parliament, he mentioned that the war is not mainly on the basis of maintaining law and order, but structural change, to maintain structural change. He was sure that the war will be over in 6 weeks. All this indicates that the war has been introduced and intentionally, and there was an objective which comes as a result of the federal government objective and then the Eritrean government objective. So as effect, there are a lot of problems happen in Tigray, which leads to target the civilians, mainly women. And this leads us to say that Tigrayan civilians who committed unspeakable atrocities, especially women and girls and youths, have become victims because they are the major role players in the society at the current and in the future. Next. Here we have a summary of the effect of the war, which is given on the basis of the destruction, the gender-based sexual violence, the executions, and the damages that has been happened to different pilgrimages and places that are mainly most of considered as historical place. So as a result of the war, a lot of destruction has been happened that affects the livelihood of the people. Crops have been burned, manufacturing places has been destructed, machineries has been looted, and a lot of bombardment and shelling that affects individual life and their way of living. Starvation, we all know that siege is becoming one of the tools in the process of the war, and Tigray people are locked from different access to and facilities to communicate, to access for the bank, access for to different service facilities that help us to run their daily life. A lot of places that are historical and considered as a remark to the Tigray society has been demolished, then Al-Negashi and churches. Then there was a systematic and state-sponsored genocidal, which was made as a result of joining forces from internal and external. As a result, thousands and millions of people have lost their life. This is not only in Tigray, but also in other parts of Ethiopia, even in Addis. There are families that they don't know where their families are. Sexual related violence, 2.5 million internally displaced, 26,000 are survivors of gender-based sexual violence, and according to the current rate, 120,000 are affected by gender-based sexual violence. And this is only from certain parts of the Tigray, not in all parts. 70,000 are displaced and are living in Sudan, and 5,000 children are separated from their families. So in general, the war has a lot of complicated impacts, which is becoming very difficult to survive. And during this process, sexual slavery has been one of the major tools used by the soldier and by those who introduced the war. Here we have a little bit a glimpse of gang rape and sexual violence in Tigray, just to indicate some of the, a bit from the whole story that has been mentioned earlier as well. So who are the actors in the process of gang rape are the Ethiopian National Defense Force, the Eritrean soldier, the Amhara militia and special military from Amhara. And when they come, they have been told and briefed that what they have to do. So we have heard a lot. The Eritrean soldiers said to the people, we have been asked to kill children aged 7 and above and to rape women. This indicates that rape in Tigray is systematic and it has been designed, planned to affect the entire society. And based on this, it can be said that rape has been used as a weapon of war by the military as well as by the leaders. So there are a lot of documents and reports that confirm this, which is by the CNN, the International Human Rights, Amnesty International, and the UNAID, etc. They declare that sexual violence have been used as a weapon of war to inflict physical and psychological damages. So this is something like there are people who try to wonder, especially people from other regions, that they try to nullify the issue. However, this is a major human rights issue disregarding of politics. Everyone has to condemn as it affects day-to-day life. And now it happened in Tigray, but we don't know what will be next in the other region. So actually, it has been mentioned on the poem, we are a country where the president is woman, the chief of justice is woman, but none of them have been mentioned, try to condemn this problem as a problem, try to protect Tigray women. Therefore, I included this with the objective of this rape used as a weapon of war has been approved by international reporters, but little action has been taken. Thank you. And here is about rape, gender-based violence in Tigray and the trend. It's just a little bit sort of a cup of water from the ocean. And just to indicate that what is the rape nature? The nature of the rape is starts from the age of 8 to the age of 6 to 89. This is to indicate that it includes children, which are really little, and also elders. And under this, it is included that is a rape, it happened once and disappeared. The actual report shows the rape has been continuing, and this is indicated by the trend. This is based on the information which is obtained here and there, which is still underreported. Rape in Tigray is underreported, but based on the underreported, some of the information obtained shows it's at an increasing trend. So initially it was like little after the war started in December, November. In March, the total number of people affected by gender-based sexual violence was 200. And then after that, it keeps on increasing. This indicates that as more investigation is conducted, there will be a lot of problems related to the issue, indicates large number of women are becoming a victim. So in general, this trend and this story indicates that the rape has been used as a tool during the war. And surprisingly, the Prime Minister has also tried to acknowledge rape has been occurred in Tigray, and it was a little bit surprised because he was trying to associate rape woman as normal act, which we never heard any about it from anyone. And this indicates something is going on, and the rape is strategically designed, planned, and systematically introduced. And here, when I say in the previous slide, rape has been systematic, because there are some information obtained from the people or from the victim. Most of the rapers that comes from Eritrea and the Amhara militia came with the objective of introducing something to the society, something alien that affects their day-to-day life, that extincts the life of Tigray people. Systematic because the Eritrean soldiers, most of them have been HIV victims, and people raped by Eritrean soldier end up with having a health problem that lasts long-lasting problem, and it can shorten their life. So they have been affected by health-related issues. Dr. Sarah also mentioned about it. And then people, the rapers from Amhara militia came with the objective of, trying to introduce genetically a genetical problem that most of the women are pregnant, and then children are, we are expecting children with unknown fathers. In addition to that, you can imagine having a child, or it's very difficult to have a child from the person who has affected the life. So this is indicating the problem is not current. And in the year to come, Tigray is going to face a lot of complicated social, economic, and political problems that will have a deeper issue in the society at large. So with that, it can be said that the gender-based sexual violence occurred in Tigray has short and long-term objective. The short-term objective is to sexual violence have a weapon of war, inflict lasting physical and psychological social damage. And the long-term objective is to create a barren Tigray or weak Tigray. So what does it mean, barren or weak Tigray? If there are a large number of people with health-related issues, obviously it implies that there will be large number of diseases a year to come. And for those who are alive, politically, economically, socially, there will be people without freedom if the things is going on as it is expected. But we believe that there will be a solution. But in general, the longer term problems or the long-term objective is to create a weak Tigray or barren Tigray. Next slide, please. This is a link between war, rape, and psychiatric disorder, and it has been confirmed that war has direct impact on rape, and rape is having direct impact on psychiatric disorder as well. The next slide. And here is a relationship between genocidal rape in Tigray. So there are 4 indicators to show that the rape in Tigray has been genocidal, because it has been part of the program to destroy Tigray people, and it was one-sided. And then the perpetrators and victims had come with the objective of introducing health-related issues or mixing genetics of Tigray people. So it can be concluded that the rape in Tigray has been controlled and calculated as well. Next. So this is about the effect of how is rape effective in genocidal. Rape has been effective in genocidal, and there are different studies that shows. And this is indicated by the effect on the victims, when then the rape and its impact on the death of the victim, and it's rape, how it communicates to the society, and how it terrorizes the victim and the society at large, and how it trashes the culture or generally, and it breaks the solidarity of the community. Next, please. And these are some of the cases from some of the women who are already raped. And it is, I'm not going to read all because I'm running short of time. So this is a case of one woman who has been raped by a group of people locked for 2 weeks. And her expression was, she said, I was numb. There was another woman, again, raped by 23 soldiers, and finally left her with a lot of alien objects inside her body, and finally poured water into her body when after they realized that her blood couldn't stop. And there was another story by another woman that asked why they are doing all this. And they told her, our problem is not with you, but with your womb. And this is some of the terrible stories and the cases that tries to indicate how the problem is still severe. Next. And why are women targeted? The reason why women are targeted is women are the central role players in the community. And when women are affected, the entire community will be affected. So in general, here are the 3 important pointers: family and community with the aim of demonizing and terrorizing. And it's sometimes used to glean information about their family. And then the other one is it is used to perish the Tigray society, preventing further birth. Please fast next. So this is a web of suffering, just to indicate that the impact of rape on the survivors. There are a lot of cases from different reports, and we do have also some cases from some of the studies that is undergoing on. And the web of suffering indicators psychological, economic, social, and problem. And here given as genocidal rape as a trauma, its impact on the individual physically, leaving them with disability, and unbearable memories, social isolation, and it also changes their relationship with their partner, negative self-image, and somatic distresses. Next. Yeah, I try to rush. So these are some of the most important points that we all should take as a take-home message. And it is not a recommendation, rather, I would rather say it's a sort of take-home message to all of us, because this is a problem that we all need to echo, and we need to talk about it, because it is a violation of human rights. It's affecting people, or government affecting people, and the Tigray people are left voiceless. So here we have the recommendation is to the international institutions to maintain the international human rights law and try to respond to the voice of Tigray people. Tigray people are locked, no food, no communication, no money, no transportation, no work. And this is really frustrating. This is a time of suffering. Tigray people are dying while they are alive, dying because of hunger, which is worse than dying because of weapon. And there are a lot of reports from the international institution which comes as, we have deep concern. Deep concern doesn't have any impact. So I guess we all need to have a joint say to address this problem in every way that we deal with, and especially whenever we have certain demonstrations or any involvement with the international institution. Deep concern doesn't have any impact. Tigray people need an action that crosses beyond the deep concern. The other problem is other parts, rape is condemned wherever it happens, at a national, international, and at the same time, I, and especially we Tigray people, also condemn those people who try to take the story of rape, the rapes and the gender-based violence that happen in Tigray. So there are a lot of stories that are undergoing, which tries to indicate similar story as it happened in Tigray. So with that, I have just included with this, we condemned all sorts of gender-based sexual violence and rape in everywhere, but we equally denounce those who make gender-based sexual violence and rape stories based on Tigray women and histories. Tigray people are like any human, they need basic necessities. So we all have to say no to rape, siege, famine, lack of medicine, and torture. Last. Next, please. Thank you so much. This is my last slide, just to indicate how the child is desperate and lacking all the necessities. And based on this slide, I call upon justice and freedom for Tigray people. Tigray people need more help than we concern. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sintayo. I know it's really difficult to fit this into such a short amount of time, so we greatly appreciate the time that you've given us. I want to remind everyone that you can send your questions in the chat. They come to me directly, and I'll hopefully, if we have time at the end, we'll be able to answer those questions. I wanted to point out on one of your slides, there was writing on the wall, and that the writing on the wall said, "We have handed you to Sha'abiya, let them roast and eat you as Tibsi." This is the amount of hate that Tigrayans are facing currently in Tigray. So thank you for that amazing presentation. We do know that rape has been used as a weapon of war. We do know that more investigations will reveal more atrocities. And so that's why we continue to call on investigations, because we demand justice. I want to point out that someone made a comment in the chat that comes to me directly about, there's two different ones I want to talk about just really quickly. One was, we know what's happening. We know the issue. Can you please give us solutions? And I understand that pain, and I understand where that comes from. And I promise that we are, as we continue with a couple of more speakers, we are going to get to justice and accountability, and we have an amazing person who's going to discuss that with us. But I don't want to take a lot of time because we do have more people. I do want to give one opportunity. I think Dr. Sarah may have come back from Magana, and she had a couple, she wanted to talk about what they're doing to help women. And so if we can give her just a minute or two, if she's still in, I do want to give her that opportunity, because it's such a rare opportunity to be able to hear directly from the ground. So is Dr. Sarah available?
Yes, I am, Lita. Okay.
Great. Go ahead.
So, yeah, the PowerPoint presentation was interrupted because of connection problems. I really apologize for that. Basically, what we've put into place here with the help of our partners internationally, you in the diaspora, giving us some information and guideline, is we have set up a committee to look at the problems that these survivors are facing. So we have created a system where we say we create awareness and we link to services. So we are trying to work with all partners working on GBV to set up services. And these services are poorly set up within the whole of Tigray. If you can go back to the map that shows Tigray, please, on the PowerPoint. It shows that there's a basic lack of services anywhere. Go forward, sorry, then just go forward. I'm sorry, I'm just trying to save time. So basically what we're trying to do is create awareness and link. So as you can see, all the red is showing lack of services that are supposed to be there. I would like to point out at this point that due to the siege, no service is available at all. The one-stop center in Magana and even the safe house in Magana have run out of resources. We don't have medication. We don't have money to buy food. We don't have, as Wazir Lamlam explained earlier, we can't even provide sanitary pads. However, there are organizations and systems in place working, trying to provide services. But those services, as you can see, if you can still go back, yeah. As you can see, the whole of Tigray is basically not covered. There are a few places that are covered. So we need to set up services in all of the places that there are no services at all. There's nobody there in place to provide any kind of service at all. So even those where there isn't service, is what I'm trying to say. But in some places, at least there are people and systems in place to provide certain amount of services. But as you can see, the whole of Tigray, there isn't much. So what we do is we try to create awareness through media campaigns, going house to house and many other tools. And then we try to link them to services. These services include physical health, psychological assistance and also legal aid when necessary. Next, please, go ahead. And yeah, so the rationale is we create awareness. To create awareness, what we need is the tools that are there. But normally one would use media and other things, but at the moment in Tigray, due to the current situation where all the families have been looted, no one has any communication mechanisms. There's no power. There's nothing. So we have to go house to house, and we have trained women to do this, to go house to house, to talk to these women and tell them about the services that are available and why they need to go and seek these services and why they need them. Next, please. Yeah, so the main objective is to provide physical health, psychological health, legal aid and livelihood support for survivors as a combined package to bring a holistic healing. Next, please. Okay, and to do all of this, we are following the interagency standards for GBV treatment agreed upon internationally, and we're doing this on with a committee that has been set up that is neutral, but was set up by the Bureau of Women's Affairs in Tigray. It contains governmental bodies like the Bureau of Women's Affairs, the Bureau of Health, the Bureau of Labor and Social Services. It also has CSOs in it. It has women activists in it, and it also contains scientists from universities and so on. So we would like to work together with all of you to create awareness. First point is creating awareness. Second is informing survivors of what services are available and why they need to go to these services. And the last one is to link. So to do this, we would need to have services made available for these women and also work on providing information to them. And to do this, as I pointed out earlier, due to the current situation, we are being forced to go house to house to do this. And we need to work with you to try to break the siege, because the siege is making our work very difficult and making it impossible to provide services. Thank you. Next. So these are manuals and standards that we have put in place. We have volunteer women who we are training. We have already trained about 270 women. We have already done a pilot study, and we have tried this out, and the pilot study results show. Can you go to the next, please? Yeah, this is the pilot study. Next, please. Next. Next. Yeah, the pilot studies shows that, yeah, the pilot study results show that ambivalent survivors who are not sure what to do with themselves are coming forward. And actually, due to the siege, because services are not available where these women are, there's a big deluge of survivors coming to Magana. And as I pointed out earlier, even in Magana, because of lack of medication, lack of resources, we are unable to take care of them. Even the safe house is unable to take in more survivors because UNFPA is not providing the funds that are needed to do this. So in addition to this, there's shame and trust issues that these women have. They feel shame, they don't trust people around them to express their problems and look for solutions. Transportation is a big problem. For example, I know a woman who had to pay over 2,500 just to come to Magana, and then she couldn't get any services. And then she's going back to her house with the problems. You can imagine how difficult it was for her to get 2,500. I know it sounds small to you, but for people who have no access to their bank savings, who have no access to any funds whatsoever. That's really a lot of money. And then there's a problem to do follow-up because there's no communication. These women come to us, then they get services, then how are we going to go to them? How are we going to communicate with them? The siege is creating all of these problems. Thank you. Next. So the challenges we are facing, so the current situation, the siege explained, no medication, no funds, no resources, no communication, so difficult to do the work. We're doing it, we're doing all we can, and we are putting things in place for when things change so that we can do them faster, but we're doing it. But, and then there's priority issues. The women and people who were, women who faced rape in Amhara and Afar are getting treated, while women in Tigray, over a year on, none of them are getting treated. I'm not saying women from there don't need to be treated, it's just that there's disparity and we're not a priority. So there's also politics into it. Next. Next. So we have opportunities. Can you go back just one? We have opportunities. Back, please. Yeah. So the timing is good because survivors are coming out forward now and they have seen the problems of not coming forward. There's thousands and thousands of women volunteers who want to work. The government of Tigray is very supportive, but we have the moral and ethical obligation to do this. Next. This is a survivor in a safe house in Tigray. She writes Arafti, which means that's what she wants. She wants relief. Can we please provide that to her? Next. Yeah, today's the day to act. Let's do our best to help GBV survivors in Tigray. Thank you very much. And thank you for letting me finish again. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. It's a pleasure. We couldn't pass up that opportunity to hear directly from the ground. We are starting to run short on time. So for our last three presenters, we ask that if you can just limit it to about 10 minutes, that would be great, because we just want a few minutes for questions and answers. And just to give you a heads up on some of the questions, and this will mostly maybe be for our justice and accountability, the very last conversation. A lot of the questions are, how do we break the siege? How do we get the world to respond and get some type of legal accountability for what's happening? I'd like to move on to our next presenter, who is also someone who needs very little introduction, Professor Tony Magana. He spent more than 10 years in Tigray, and he still is the professor and head of neurosurgery at Magana University School of Medicine. He has been a prominent voice in trying to end the siege and break the war on Tigray. I think I reversed those, but you get what I'm saying. He also shared his terrifying testimony at the start of the war. More than 70% of the healthcare facilities have been destroyed in Tigray. Medicines have been looted. People are dying of basic diseases such as lack of insulin. So Professor Tony, without further ado, please take the stage.
Okay, I think you're controlling the screen, which is okay. I'll just say next slide. It says going to, yeah. So before the war, Tigray had an outstanding health system in things like maternal health, delivery, preventive services. We were actually one of the best in the country. But as a result of the war, this collapsed. So this was a radical change. Next slide. What we saw with the onset of the war was a two-pronged problem that relates to sexual violence. One was the primary attacks on healthcare. 65% of the healthcare facilities in Tigray were destroyed. 73% have significant damage, and 20% were actually used as sometimes as rape centers, sometimes as quarters. And at the same time, you had destruction of infrastructure. And you can see here this picture of an ambulance. Most of the ambulances were taken or destroyed. by the invading forces. And when we talk about women's health care, maternity health care and rape victims were often sent by ambulance. That was totally destroyed. And at the same time, the only standing healthcare facilities you have now are in Mekelle. And we started to see patients every day in the emergency room beginning just a few hours after the onset of the war. We were seeing sometimes 130 patients an hour. And they didn't just have sexual violence injuries. They had other injuries as well. And of course, the system for dealing with the medical, legal, social problem of sexual violence was rendered inoperative and was not set up to see these high numbers. We know that first they were reported in the hundreds by Amnesty International. I had discussions with diplomatic sources when I finally left Mekelle, and now we know that they go up to over 200 and 200,000 plus. Next slide. So what are the resources from a medical point of view and societal point of view that are needed to deal with sexual violence? You need to have investigative, enforcement, and judicial authorities. You have to have emergency medical care, transportation, specialized assessment and counseling, and rehabilitative services. You have to have diagnostic testing for medical conditions, including STDs, drugs, pregnancy, prophylactic and therapeutic medication. You have to have availability of on-site counseling and follow-up. And you have to have community support services. And we're going to talk a little bit more about Fevin Teklahamet, who's a Mekelle lecturer on psychotherapeutics who's treated 300 of these people. But she makes the statement that rehabilitation of rape victims is not possible without meaningful economic support. Next slide. There is a generally accepted protocol for the medical management of sexual violence, and I'm not going to go through the details here, but they generally need to get prophylaxis against HIV infection, against the well-known sexually transmitted diseases. They need to get treatment of injuries to the sexual organs, both internal and external, expert evaluation, and records and pictures need to be taken for later judicial response. All of these things were very difficult beginning just within the first few hours of the war, because the whole system, the medical system and the counseling system and everything was overwhelmed. And by the time of the occupation of Mekelle, which happened about November 26th, I remember, I mean, it just got worse rather than better. Especially I can recall when they got as close as Wukro, I mean, these people were coming in 10s and 20s by the hour with these type of injuries. Those from farther away didn't have a way to make it to Mekelle. And we even had doctors and nurses walking from Adigrat, from Shiro and Axum, taking days to come by foot to Mekelle. Next slide. Fevin Teklahamet is a psychotherapist and lecturer at Mekelle University, and she has been involved in the treatment of women victims of sexual violence in Tigray in 20 urban and rural locations throughout. During these times, she's treated over 331 women and girls. Her patients were of all ages. The oldest was a 75-year-old grandmother, and the youngest was a child of 6 years. And the people at the Peace Initiative at Tufts University have written about her this week, and there's a link there if you want to read it. Next slide. And this is her experience. She's facilitated medical assistance to those who had physical problems, including interruption of rape-induced pregnancy, various forms of reproductive system infections, fistula, and bullet wounds. I've also treated my patients for various forms of psychological problems, post-traumatic stress, depression, anxiety, all types of somatic symptoms, panic attacks, obsessive compulsive disorders. Many of the victims died from the abuse. Many others are struggling to survive the trauma of suffering they went through. I've cuddled and attempted to comfort many of those who are grieving for lost family members who are still suffering from the physical and psychological consequences of the violence they endured. I've learned that the whole population of Tigray is struggling to survive the genocide, but learned that those victims of sexual violence are the most challenged, devastated, and disadvantaged in their struggle. Next slide. And this is just to talk about what the current status of medical facilities are in Tigray. I mean, most of them are not functioning at all outside of Mekelle. There's maybe 8% of services available in all of Tigray, and most of those are in Mekelle. Next slide. And this is more talking about damage to the hospitals and clinics. It's almost total. And the point I wanted to make here is that when we talk about the healthcare of women and children, the healthcare indicators that we had before the war have all basically dropped to zero. So even not talking about the rape-related problems, things like fistulas that require sophisticated surgical care and diagnosis, sexually transmitted disease, diabetes associated with pregnancy, hypertension. Even for the women that weren't raped, we're going to see high numbers of fistula problems, morbidity and mortality to the children that are born in these times, to the children that develop problem, as well as the mothers. And of course, the destruction to the family. You know, the mothers of Tigray, they help raise, they do most of the child raising, but they also work on the farm. 88% of Tigray lives in a rural community. They make maybe less than $200 a year. This has all been destroyed. So the family's been destroyed. Many of these families, you know, the biggest support for a Tigray family is relatives and friends and neighbors. They've lost communication and transportation. So these effects are going to be terribly magnified. Next slide. So what does the future look like? Mulugeta Gebrehat, who was a senior fellow at the World Peace Foundation, and now he's involved at Tufts, has written this, and I think this is very important. Tigray is going to face a huge task of creating an enabling environment for dealing with rape crimes according to the international treaties ratified by Ethiopia. The task of addressing the medical, psychosocial, economic, and legal needs of the victims of the genocide will in any case fall on the shoulders of Tigray and its government. It's therefore mandatory for Tigray to create the infrastructure capable of dealing with a huge caseload. The regional government of Tigray also needs to review and update its legal measures to introduce measures to respond to the problem of sexual violence of all kinds, not just conflict-related or genocidal rape. And I was asked to talk about what the future is. And I think it's important, as somebody who's interested in Tigray and interested in the university, that Tigray is going to be by itself, given what's happening in Ukraine and the weakness of the African Union and the international community. No, as has always happened to the Tigray, they have to solve their own problems. They're going to have to solve their own resources. And working with the Tigray Healthcare Professionals Organization, and also with Dr. Mulugeta, who's listening in on this, we have to create working bodies between all the diaspora groups and the specialized groups and sort of assign tasks to each other. I know we're in the midst of talking with the Tigray Development Association about finding out how we can collect funds and start to distribute them. I know we're working with the WHO about what what you can take. For example, insulin normally requires refrigeration. There's already some work in Mekelle looking at that you can bury insulin in the ground. It'll stay cold and keep. And I think it's worth noting that yesterday, Mekelle University created the Institute for Biotechnology, looking for ways to be able to implement biotechnology in the very challenging situation that it is now. So I think there's going to need to be cooperation and a sense that although we want external support from outside NGOs and those type of things, it may not happen. Or if it does happen, it's probably not going to happen to the extent that's really needed. Next slide. Yeah, and this is part of everybody else's talk, but clearly the United Nations has a definition for what genocide is. And this situation clearly meets it. And I'm hopeful myself to be able to return to Tigray and continue to rebuild the work that we were doing at Mekelle University and with the Tigray Regional Health Bureau. And from my point of view, I think these two organizations, which worked very closely together in the past, are going to have to be the leaders again. And I think I'll leave it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Tony. That was a really powerful and concise presentation. I was really taken aback when you said at one point you were treating 130 patients, and that 130 per hour. That's really shocking. The other thing is I was really taken aback by the resiliency of the people. You said that you're working out mechanisms where you can bury insulin in the ground to keep it cold. I think that's really powerful and speaks to the resilience of Tigrayans, and that we do have to come together and solve our own problems. Okay, I wanna jump to our next panelist because I know there's not much time. This individual, Professor Fetian, she is a homegrown hero and champion of farmers. She is one of my favorite people on earth. She really did trade a comfortable life in the West to go back to Tigray and work with the farmers. And she's done everything from plant breeding and food processing and women cooperatives and increasing market diversity. And there's so much there. The reality is that Tigrayans are starving in a man-made famine. And don't forget, this war started during the harvest season. So without further ado, Professor Fetian will discuss the livelihood and food productivity in Tigray. And again, because of our short time, Professor Fetian, please try and keep it to 10 minutes or less.
Thank you so much, Mileta, for the introduction. I appreciate also. Yeah, it's unfortunate to be at the end of the presentation. Otherwise, the topic I'm handling is, it is not yet reported so much, and I want the audience to give it attention to my presentation. So first, I would like, without presenting Mekelle University, I cannot proceed, to be honest, because I worked in a vibrant, progressive university, amazing university, as it is mentioned by Professor Tony. And its more interesting point is, the university is an inclusive engagement for gender, and nationally, Ethiopia plan to be 28% in the universities, but we have already achieved 31% female students and the increased number of female staff. But I would like to ask, what defines me and what defines us, especially the Tigrayan community? Who are we? I want to ask this question. I will take you to the Tigray I know. And next slide, please. I'm going to take you to agriculture. Agriculture is my passionate field. And we have, 53% of livelihood source income, farmers and anybody attached with the agriculture. And Tigray was reported to progress 8% because we are conservation, agriculture oriented, increasing educations, and were recognized globally and nationally, whatever. and the productivity of the Tigrayan environment was unbelievable. It has increased so much. Technologies was delivered successfully. And in 2020, we produced more than 18 million quintal only for grains and pulses, not including fruits, vegetables. So if you see, divided it by the number of residents, including also the off-farm income sources, it is clear we were self-reliant in terms of food availability, access, and stability. And we have very industrious farmers who are open for new technologies. And the women, today presentation, I will focus on women, and they are very much empowered. They are in knowledge base. By the way, when I would like to introduce myself, I don't work for farmers. I work with them. I sit with them. I eat with them. So, everything, I'm a function of farmers' environment of Tigray. That's why I worked there for the last 29 years without moving out for other purpose, for seeking better salary or whatever. But what I would like to present is war has destroyed the wealth accumulated for years. It destroys the investors, the Tigrayan high earning group, it destroys the farmers, and the number of food insecure households used to be 24.7%, but due to war, it has increased to 77.3 just in 1 year. You can imagine how it has been devastated. Next slide, please. Because of our conservation strategy, Tigray has been awarded globally in the Equator Prize, and Abahawi has a motto saying that there is no dry land, it's only the dry mind. You can see the women are the center of the conservation. They were really working hard, and for the success of this award, they had 60% of contribution. Next, I have to run because of the time you said. You see, I said, who are we? We are civilized people. We are people with dignity. We are a great place for invaders. We are host in the center of various regions, religions, and we are also a custodian of agrobiodiversity, serving the globe, serving the country, serving our people as a center of diversity. If you can see down on the left side, it is called Pirli millet, locally Bultuk, only grows by Kunama in Tigray. And you see all the farmer down on the right side in the northwestern Asgad's drone attack and so on. Let's move, please. See also this one. Can you imagine? Go down to the left side is a wild of disease resistance, a source of productivity. Sorghum has been a program for African improvement, high lysine, high nutrition. We have varieties on this area. On the top left side is a woman from Gedebit. On the right side top is northwestern Tigray, Asgadas Imbla. On the barley field, she is from eastern Tigray in Azbi. And this woman was working as a daily laborer in my project, but she had a handful of seed, and on the next year, we saw her planting the seed in such big field. You can imagine how these people are so experimental and so industrious. Please move on. See also this one. This woman is an amazing woman in Tigray, that she came out, she changed a stone, a land occupied by stone, into fruits. And she has a farm called Harogurama Organic Fruit Farm. She is in Rama. She's a mother of 6, employer of 13 permanent workers, including she employed her husband as a driver. She had also 50 to 60 part-time students. Even migrants, Eritrean migrants, were working with her. University graduate students are usually working in the summer. She has 7,600 fruit trees, and she also concerned about animal feed, and she promotes 7 mango varieties in her field, and she provides 2,500 quintal per year. And she sells certified per, and she was awarded as impactful rural woman in agricultural award globally. This is really an amazing part of the Tigrayan woman. But what happened after the war, I will present later. Please move on. This is, one of a very industrious people. We call them the soil makers. They don't grow on the soil they have, because their area is mountainous. They create land. They create land, they grow crop, and they have water harvesting techniques. The water you can see below is already owned by individuals, and they produce a very good, sweet, popular Gunda Gundo orange. But this fruit takes 6 to 7 years. Then the Sharia trope has distracted it. Plants don't speak. What is the reason for distracting fruit trees? How many years do we need? If we have to plant immediately, farmers should wait 6 to 7 years. Globally, there is a standard for war, and it says, don't cut trees, don't kill innocent people. This is really a clear manifestation of war crime. And this happens in the monastery, not only in this place, it happened also in other places, because we had massified irrigation intervention. We had vegetables. Even, I started to be seed producer. I had hybrid maize in my farm. They just taken it out. What can I do? I can't believe they harvest everything. It was a green crop, but they just took it. Next. See, no, please. This is in the central part of Tigray in my Brazil. Kanis is a woman. She has very small babies on her back and also another one. And there is an expert trained her, and looking at her, she's grafting her guava tree. Grafting, she's taking place of the role of breeder. And she grafts in favor of better quality, and she makes better money because of that kind of activity. So the women are very industrious. You can't believe their role is so invisible, not reported so much, not recognized so much, but they are still like this. Next. This is also, farmers in Tigray are very open for new introduction. This is around the farm I mentioned in Nagula, where I am involved as a seed producer recently. This is an onion farm I produce, and the lady is trained hybridizing tomato. You can see this is how the market in Wokra is very rich in terms of providing tomato, in terms of providing vegetable gardens to the nearby Amhara region and Sokota area as well. All over Tigray has been very rich in terms of vegetable production. Please. When you drive in Tigray, a minimum 50 kilometer distance, you find new food type belongs especially to the local areas. It's a very diverse region in terms of attitude, in terms of food type, in terms of culture, in terms of beautification methods. You can see helbat is a mixture of several legume crops and also medicinal crops. And it's a fasting food, and it's very unique, belongs to the central part of Tigray, Adwa, Aksum, and so on. So you see the PhD student is collaborating with them. They were making a very good business out of it. We had also other food producer cooperatives in other, so much starving on TV, and very difficult to accept such kind of devastation when people are get starved, when they are able to produce food. And the popular food, my favorite, very healthy food in terms of health components, beta-glucan and iron, and so many benefits, very much popular for tourists also. Known in the eastern part of Tigray, Adigrat, Wukro, and Daswi, and the shuro is the Tigrayan shuro is known spicy and very good, and several people are benefiting out of commercializing, taking their knowledge. But I just want to bring to your attention how our women are very much industrious, very much innovative and creative. Next. This is one of the amazing contribution where I had with Sue Edward, mother of Dr. Sarah. We had a conservation project in the central part of my Brazil. The community are very brave, and they identified a deaf woman to be a community photographer. And you can see her, how she is busy to take every component. You don't need to ask what happened before. You just get the photograph record from this deaf young woman, and it was quite successful. I don't know where she is, but I just want to bring to your attention who are the Tigrayan people and the farming community. They were so busy to work on their livelihood, to transform their agriculture, to produce a new generation, active generation, like what has been already observed. The Tigrayan youth, scientists, experts were so much competent and so much preferred globally because of they came out of a hardworking community. Next. I was so impressed when I see this woman. She posted this plan in her home. And it says, I will use improved seed, irrigation, composting, planting fruit. And what makes me surprised was she recorded, I will introduce new food products from neglected edible fruit trees. Is that not surprising? It's very impressive. I was with her in the same hairstyle, and I was impressed to look at her planning. I never expected. The moment I traveled to the farming community, I always learn. I'm very rich in terms of bringing the case of farmers' knowledge and innovations. And right now, I am a donor advisor at the CG Center, where we advise the donors to target such kind of innovative farmers. They are the basis of the globe. Please, next. Yeah, this is just the unfortunate war, the devastating war, a coordinated and also combined war at once. And you can see we had this grasshopper desert locust and all the drone attack, burning their food, burning their crops, harvesting their crop, killing them while they are harvesting. Everything happened, and it has, a very clear famine genesis. Next. Yeah, I want to, but you see, we have a very high unemployment for the whole community because of the war. So you can see how much the crisis is very devastating. And the next one is the perceived availability of food. Before, in 2012, which is we had we had a very low shortage of food, 2.97%. But after the war, it becomes 82.8%. Because all the food produced, as I told you, more than 80 million quintals, has been looted and distracted and tortured. The whole western part of farmers were, displaced, obliged to displace as a mass displaced, and others were obliged also to stay at home. Next, please. This is a very interesting figure that was taken from a place, a mountain called Soha. It's around Ragahamus. Let us start from the October 2020, top on the left side. You can see there were trees covering that tip part of mountain, but right away after the war, it is almost 50% of the trees has been cut down. And if you see the red line, is a spot for charcoal making, either by the military or by whatever, but I would like to present how the deforestation has happened, how many years it took us to be at this level. Comparing to that on the right side, in April and in May, it has already completely distracted because of widespread of deforestation is happened. Very unfortunate. Tigray has been recovered. We were working on that basis, but now they have already distracted it. Very, very, very shocking. Please, next.
Professor Fetian, just 1 minute, please. We are out of time.
Oh, really? So livestock is distracted in the bagite is very special product. They distracted. Next, please. Next. An old man said, we had never seen a government against farmers like the current situation in Tigray. Even the Derg regime, we continue our farming system. Next, please. Next. So this is about the farming. Can you go to the more important slide I have? Okay, this is what I would like to present as very important. I want to call upon, on behalf of myself and my farmers and the women farmers, to the current decision makers of Ethiopia. The first person I would like to call is Waizoro Sahle-Work Zewde, the president of Ethiopia. First, I would like to ask this woman, as a woman, as like me, she's a mother. You are a mother. You are a sister. You are auntie. How would you celebrate when people are starved? As a leader, why don't you stop the war? Will you sleep when your sisters be killed like now? Where are you? The second group I would like to call upon is to the parliamentary. Where is your representation for the people of Tigray? Where is your representation? Where is your critical action in that regard? The Prime Minister, Dr. Abiy, you are a father of 3 girls and you are a husband, you are a brother. Do you sleep at all when people are being raped, dehumanized, and blocked? I call upon you to stop the government-sponsored hate. And as a leader, leadership, if you see the real leadership and critical leaders, people are the greatest asset of leadership. But the Tigrayan women are dehumanized. So I want to ask you, please behave at least like a human being.
Thank you, Professor
And Ethiopians and African Union, please give respect, love to these mothers, Their mass migration will come soon. It will never stop in Ethiopia. All parties, donors, please join us. All investments you have been working with us is distracted. In the first world and second world, agriculture was defined as a depressive business. But in Tigray, it is beyond depressive. It is devastated. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Fetian. It's always intriguing to listen to what you have to say, and I'm so sorry to cut you off. We just only have 4 minutes left in our scheduled event. We will try and get a couple of questions in, but I want to introduce our last speaker, and we will go just a little bit over, so if you can stay with us, that's great. You will try and extend just 10 or 15 minutes. Isaias Hailemariam is our last speaker. He has been a prominent voice for the people of Tigray, focusing on accountability and justice, in particular for the victims, and of course, trying to get the war on Tigray to stop. Isaias has been on national and international news outlets representing Tigray. He is a lawyer. He studied at the University of California, Berkeley, and today he will discuss justice, accountability, and the role of the international community. And Isaias, there's a question that I'm just going to put out that maybe you can answer during your presentation, but the question is, what legal measures can we take to help break the siege and help Tigrayans be able to survive? Is there anything we can do legally to force accountability right now for survivors? The floor is yours. And Isaias, you're muted. If you're trying to speak, we can't hear you yet.
Yeah, so the host didn't allow me to unmute, so I'm sorry about that. So thank you very much, Melita. So I believe that I'm given 10 minutes, right? Full 10 minutes, or just to answer that particular question, just to...
Yes, you have the 10 minutes.
Okay, thank you very much. I feel honored to be part of this important conversation as we celebrate the International Women's Day to amplify the gruesome act perpetrated against Tigray women and girls. The topic of my presentation today is justice, accountability, and the role of international community. You know, the most difficult but very important part of the conversation, which is accountability. So how do we hold the perpetrators accountable? So to ensure justice for victims of sexual violence during armed conflict, I believe a good understanding of the elements of the violence and ways to hold perpetrators accountable is very important. In my short presentation, I will explore the general overview of conflict-related sexual violence, obstacles in prosecuting perpetrators, international instruments or laws, and the available mechanisms to hold perpetrators accountable. And I will end with some concluding remarks. First, I have to give some legal definition, the legal definition of conflict-related sexual violence, CRSV, and its characteristics. I think first thing we should know is that, you know, I've reviewed different documents, and it looks like that the definition of the sexual violence during armed conflicts it's characterized by violence which is perpetrated in conflict territory. So the first element is the act of sexual violence during armed conflict is committed in conflict zones. So which means the definition restricts the sexual violence in geographically. So I think that's problematic, and that's the reason is because sexual violence can be committed even beyond conflict zones. For example, Tigrayans have been raped, and even men were sodomized in parts of Ethiopia where there is no conflict. For example, in the capital city, where there is thousands of Tigrayans were in concentration camps. So I think the very definition that limits the sexual violence in conflict zones is problematic because, like I said, it happens even beyond conflict zones. And the other problem I noticed earlier, somebody was mentioning about gender-based violence, and I think that gender-based violence is a little bit narrow because conflict-related sexual violence is wider in scope. It pertains to women and girls and even the entire ethnic groups with the intent to eliminate the entire ethnic groups. So I think calling it gender-based violence may be an understatement. So I think I just want to, just want you to, pay attention to that. Unlike its name, which is conflict-related, TRSV, or conflict-related sexual violence, also happens during or post-conflict. So it's not just a matter that happens during conflict. It also happens even after the conflict is completed. For example, currently, there's no war around the capital city, Addis and other parts of Ethiopia, but still there's, sexual violence has been perpetrated against Tigrayans throughout Ethiopia. So, we have to be careful that it's not just committed in conflict zones, but it also happens post-conflict and even beyond the geographic limits of the conflict zone. And sexual violence during armed conflicts includes rape, sexual slavery, like by putting women in some form of sexual servitude or slavery, forced prostitution. This happens when a group is controlled militarily. There's economic problems, so as a result, women may be forced to engage in prostitution. So that also is part of the conflict-related sexual violence, passive rape, and forced pregnancy, sexual torture, and abortion and sterilization. So you name it. So it's very wide in scope. It's not just rape, but it contains different elements. And it pertains to both sex. It's not just the female, even though women and girls are the majority of victims, but it also involves men. Actually, there were men who, even during this conflict in Tigray, there were men who were sodomized by the armed groups, the invaders, the Ethiopian Eritrean forces and the Amhara militia. So we have to be also pay attention to the different genders. I think we need to pay attention to the characteristics of the armed conflict or the groups who committed the act and the motivation pertaining to the rape. Obviously, the motive is very clear. Political and economic dominance of Tigray and the characteristics of the rape committed against the individuals. Mostly, the sexual violence in Tigray was committed against women, obviously. And I don't want to discuss that. A lot have been said before. And I think the second point is we have to make distinction between conflict-related sexual violence and other forms of sexual violence. They're different. Ordinary sexual violence or crime is attributed to the individual who committed it. It's individual behavior, and that entails personal responsibility. But when it comes to conflict-related sexual violence, there is chain of command, military, police force, security apparatus, and primarily designed and directed by the political wing. So there is collective responsibility or state responsibility. So it's completely different from the ordinary sexual violence. So we have to identify that. And in ordinary rape, the motive may be sexual gratification or other personal motive. However, in conflict-related sexual violence, the main goal is to humiliate, embarrass, and inflict trauma on a particular group, in our case, on Tigrayan women and girls, infect sexual transmitted disease, disrupt the normal reproductive purpose of the group. So basically the depopulation of the ethnic group. So the motive is completely different from ordinary sexual violence. And the other point I want to highlight is conflict-related sexual violence is deliberate acts intended to humiliate and punish a particular group, in our case, Tigrayans. Well, in this, unlike ordinary crimes of rape, intention doesn't really matter. Like in most crimes, you have to prove intention, the intent to, kill or steal, etc. But in conflict-related sexual violence, you just need the general intent or knowledge to commit the crime or the act of rape. So you don't have to prove, specific intent to rape a woman or girl. So it's also a little bit different in terms of intent. Regardless, conflict-related sexual violence in Tigray was committed with deliberate intent, spearheaded by command of chains, where soldiers, police force, armed militia, and even civilian perpetrators were instructed to commit the act of rape against Tigray women and girls. So, it's slightly different from what you would normally expect. So the ultimate goal of all this drama is to eliminate the entire population if possible, and or ensure economic and political dominance against Tigrayans. So we know that for sure. Sexual violence during conflicts, it's not an inevitable part or collateral damage, but a method of warfare calculated to achieve a specific political agenda. So I've heard it multiple times when I had conversation with different people. Some of them say, quote unquote, say ያሳዝናል, but just ጦርነት አይደል ያጋጥማል, which translates into this is war, and during war, unfortunately, some random act of rape happens. So that's what I heard from some reckless people try to justify the act of rape against Tigray women. That's totally not accurate, actually. Conflict-related sexual violence is deliberate, systematic, well orchestrated. It's a psychological warfare. We've seen it in Bosnia and Herzegovina, in Rwanda, and Democratic Republic of Congo. So sexual violence during armed conflict is totally intentional. This is very important. The intention is really important. There are particular obstacles to prosecute acts of rape and sexual violence. Hopefully, you are. I'm using my own slide, so I didn't ask you to move to the next slide. So the practical obstacles to prosecute acts of rape and sexual violence. So there are problems in prosecuting the acts of sexual violence during conflicts. The first and foremost, there's no centralized enforcement mechanism and legal framework. So unlike different countries, the United Nations is not a country. So unfortunately, it's a collective, it's a loose, or it's a union of different countries. So which means there's no centralized court system. Even though there is the International Criminal Court, there's no centralized police force or military. Even though there is Security Council and other forms of military. So there's lack of centralized enforcement mechanism when it comes to international laws and international tribunals. And second problem is UN resolutions, except some resolutions, including resolutions under Article 25, Chapter 7. Most UN resolutions are just expressions of political will. They're not binding laws. That's the problem. Some of them are, but most resolutions are just expressions of wills, which means they're very difficult to implement. That's the second most important problem with holding perpetrators accountable. And we have regional and continental organizations, for example, NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. These are political organizations. So their main focus is on members. Their members. They're concerned about their members. Ethiopia and Tigray or Eritrea, these are not their concerns as such. So condemning conflict-related sexual violence against women, and the reason is because in the past there was widespread sexual violence in Bosnia and Herzegovina. These are European countries. So obviously, when sexual violence happened against Tigray women and girls, they didn't take any action because obviously NATO is it's a collection of 30 or more European and North Atlantic countries. So their focus is only on their members. So this is also another problem. And the last problem is the politically charged domestic legal system and framework. So obviously, to hold perpetrators of sexual violence through armed conflict, first we have to exhaust local remedies, which is local courts, local law. Obviously, we don't expect that from Ethiopia, because it's against natural justice. So a judge cannot sit in his or her own case. So he can't be a judge in your case, right? So we don't expect the Abiy and his military to prosecute these criminal elements like the soldiers and the generals and the political figures, because they're the ones who spearheaded and designed it first to begin with. So we don't expect that, and also people who commit crime like these soldiers, whenever they commit such crimes, if they're to be held accountable, they have to go through the military tribunal, the military courts. So in the military courts, obviously, these are the courts that sentence thousands of Tigrayans, former ENDF soldiers, to death because of their ethnic background. So, and they even try to repatriate or bring back Tigrayan soldiers from Sudan and elsewhere. So I would not expect justice from local courts. So obviously, this is just done. This is just impossible for the domestic tribunals and laws to hold the criminals accountable. We don't expect that. And there are different laws. I will, I'm very conscious of the time limit, the 10 minutes. So I will just, try to, read some of the international laws and resolutions, pertain to sexual violence during armed conflict. The first one is the UN Security Council Resolution 1820, which was adopted in 2008. It defined sexual violence during armed conflict. A rape, it says rape and other forms of sexual violence can constitute war crimes, crimes against humanity, or constitutive act with respect to genocide. These sexual violence can also be genocide. There's intersection between conflict-related sexual violence and genocide, because in genocide there's an intent to destroy. So if the sexual violence is committed with the intent to destroy, which we've seen it in the past, whenever these soldiers, Ethiopian or Eritreans and other soldiers committed sexual violence, they were telling the women and girls that they are trying to destroy them or convert their ethnic composition, or etc. So basically, we have credible evidence that their intent is to destroy the entire ethnic groups, which means this sexual violence constitutes genocide, actually, based on the definition of the resolution. And there are different cases. In Rwanda case, for example, there's a Akayesu case, which was heard during the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda. And we can use that as a case precedent. There are certain limitations. Given the time limit, I can't go detail. And we also have the UN Security Council Resolution 1820, which was adopted in 2008, and the UN Security Council 1888, which was adopted in 2009, which appointed a special representative to the Secretary General on sexual violence in conflict zones. So there were different measures taken by the UN. There's also the conflict-related sexual violence. By the way, it was first recognized during the Security Council resolution in 2000. The first time this crime was recognized by UN was back in 2000. And there are a number of resolutions, including the most recent NATO heads of state and government expressing their commitment to fight against sexual violence during armed conflict, which was a meeting in Chicago and Wales, I think back in 2012 and 2014. So basically, the United Nations, these regional organizations, and a number of countries have adopted different measures to combat and prosecute crimes of sexual violence during armed conflict. But these are, there are certain limitations, unfortunately, because like I said, international law is a soft law. There's no centralized enforcement mechanism. And some of the measures require political will. So for example, NATO and even UN, it's just a political union, basically. So they're concerned about their political benefit, and unfortunately, they're not serious when it comes to crimes committed outside, like in countries in Africa and other parts of the world. These are the main problems. So my concluding points are: first, let's ensure accountability and justice and reparation to the victims. I can't go into detail, but some of the most important points are to hold criminals accountable when it comes to sexual violence. The most important part is collecting evidence collection, documentation, and secure data repository. This is very important. Evidence is very crucial when it comes to holding criminals accountable. And we have to identify the characteristics, features of sexual violence. I tried to mention earlier, it has its own different characteristics, so we have to identify that. And proper investigation and witness protection and rehab is also required, because you can't use victims as witnesses if they're not rehabilitated. Rehabilitation is very important. Psychologically, they have to be prepared to be witnesses, and a proper investigation of the crime is also very important. And witness protection. If there's no strong witness protection mechanism, some of the witness they're afraid to participate, to be part of the process. They're afraid. They're afraid to be retaliation of different forms. So witness protection is very important. And the second major recommendation is we have to seek international support. So we can do it by ourselves, and I think we should seek support from other organizations and countries and non-state actors. We have to pressure the international community using media. It can be print media or digital media, and lobbying key international actors, states and institutions. We've been doing that, but I think we have to scale up these efforts to the next level. And creating awareness is also very important probably through public diplomacy and other ways, creating awareness to the international community that this gruesome act of crime has been committed against Tigrayan women and girls. And lastly, we have to prosecute the perpetrators using all available avenues. When I say avenues, it can be international laws and tribunals, even with their own limitation. And we have to use countries that allow universal jurisdiction. There are different countries in the world where you can prosecute criminals if they commit these core crimes, genocide, war crimes, suppressing against humanity. There are a number of countries, including Belgium and other, I think about 12 countries, where you can exercise universal jurisdiction. You can prosecute. You don't have to go through the international court system, but you can prosecute in those countries if you fulfill certain requirements. So using universal jurisdiction is the second avenue. And finally, we have to demand the UN to assign special rapporteur to Ethiopia to investigate this particular conflict-related sexual violence in Tigray. I know that there are three international figures have been assigned to investigate the crime against the crime into Ethiopia in general, but this sexual violence is very particular and requires special attention. And I think demanding the UN to sign a special rapporteur could be very helpful. Thank you all for listening. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Isaias. We're running out of time we've ran out of time for questions. People are sticking with us, so we're going to add just another 10 minutes. Just one quick question, and I think it's an important one, and this is for you, Isaias. What evidence or data should we be collecting right now so that justice can eventually, can you hear me? Can everyone hear me okay? Can't hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, you can, okay.
Yes.
Isaias, can you hear me? He's muted. Is Isaias muted? Please unmute him. I think that's what he's trying to tell us.
So I can't unmute unless the host unmutes me. Sorry about that.
Got it. So the question is just what evidence should be collected so that eventually people can be held accountable?
I think the first element of evidence is the witness is the most important. The first is the witness, the victim herself is the most crucial evidence, and second, the circumstantial evidence. The victim is the direct evidence, the primary evidence, and circumstantial evidence, for example, medical, anything that is discovered during the medical process, for example, the hot metal rod that was inserted in the woman's reproductive organ can be used as evidence, and other witnesses, like for example, family members. These are like secondary evidences, but the most important part of the evidence is the witness, the victim herself. So these are, I think, critical in bringing the perpetrators accountable when it comes to evidence.
Thank you. And this is just one more question, and anyone can answer this, and then I'll read the call to action, and then we're going to have someone from GSTS come up to close us out. What are your there's a feeling that Tigray has been forgotten by the world. So who here has a recommendation for how we can get the world to act before it's too late? This can be related to breaking the siege. This can be related to getting aid to victims, all of it. Anyone is welcome to jump in.
Can I say something?
Yes.
Next week, the film Bisa is going to be showing in London, and it's a story of a young woman who actually the Tigray made her pregnant so she could be a spy in Addis. But it's a very strong story. And I think one of the problems, I was talking with Helena, who's a filmmaker with the health practitioners for Tigray. We have to get a human story, and it has to be in English. You know, Elja Ebenar, the one from CNN, has disappeared talking about Tigray. There's nobody telling the story in a human way. Even what we did today was mostly scientific and professional related. If you look at what's coming out of Ukraine, it's a human story that everyone can relate to. This is, in my opinion, what has to happen. This is how you're going to build sympathy and empathy. Thank you.
Powerful point. Is there anyone else who would like to add to that? If not, I will go to a call to action. Okay. And you're right, Professor. You're absolutely right. There's so many stories and there's been so much trauma and it's come so fast that we've had a hard time just taking one story and amplifying it so that people have something to relate to. And so that's something that everyone, especially in media, needs to focus on doing better. So there are a couple of items that I want to just read out for you. This is our call to action. The main things that we're hoping for are an increase in immediate humanitarian access to all of Tigray and opening up the humanitarian corridors and pushing for more airdropping of both medicine and food. The second call to action is for the International Commission of Human Rights Experts on Ethiopia to be operational quickly and be victim-centered. We're calling for funding and support for holistic services geared towards survivors, including but not limited to medical, social, psychological care, and community education to break stigma. And we intentionally use the word survivor here because language matters. And so we don't want to call them victims. Complete restoration of services, including internet, electricity, water, banking, transportation, and telecommunications throughout Tigray. And the fifth item is our last call is for the international community to use all political and economic tools at their disposal to pressure the Ethiopian government to end the siege. I want to bring up, let me see, I'm not sure who from GSTS is coming up. But if Tech can unmute whoever is coming up, then we'll just get their closing remarks. Dr. Gabrakidan is coming up. So I'd like to invite you to close us out. Thank you everyone for your time.
Melita, can I want to raise one point. Sorry.
Sure. Okay, quickly.
Yeah, I mean, in line with the suggestion made by Professor Tony, I agree with him that most of us, Tegaru, are already traumatized. For example, I cannot write, I cannot, it's a very, very, very difficult time for us. And we're not efficient as expected in terms of producing, writing live reports. So we have to coordinate each other. We have to include journalists like Melita. We have to include lawyers, and all of us. We have, we call it in Tigrinya, I don't know if it is possible. Myself, I am always, my head is always heavy. I used to consider myself as a powerful woman, but I am not anymore. I am not. So this was really a very difficult time for us, but we have to learn from our brothers, sisters, farmers who are still innovating to adapt new way of doing things. Like Dr. Sarah has presented some ideas of collaboration while she is in a more stressing environment. So let us strengthen ourselves. Let us try to collaborate more. I have so many friends, African friends, who are standing with me, other friends, others also. So let us build our friendship and let us do something. We are recently working in producing different publications in different ways. We are much better now, but the current situation are again affected us. So we are all in trauma, those of us in diaspora.
Yes, Professor Fetian, we feel your...
So sorry that I agree with you, but the problem I want to explain, but the rest of you participants, let us collaborate and let us be strong. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Professor Fetian. We feel your heart and we feel your pain. Believe me, we are in this together. So please, please know that we feel that, and it's okay. It's okay to cry. We're all there, trust me. Sometimes tears are cleansing. So thank you. I want to bring up Dr. Gebrekidan. If you are ready to take the stage, it is all yours.
Okay, thank you so much, Melita. Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you so much, Melita. I think I don't want to take really much time after such wonderful presentations by all our speakers. However, I would like to extend my huge appreciation to all our distinguished speakers who have delivered such wonderful deliberations on the most horrific weaponized sexual violence committed on the women and the girls of Tigray. I really thank on the behalf of GSTS to all the speakers and also to Ms. Lemlem and Dr. Sarah, who joined us directly from the ground from Mekelle, despite the now and then interruption of power and also the network. So we are very thankful to all of you. I would also like to extend my huge appreciation to all the moderators, Melita, Goitom, and all the technical committee, the organizing committee who has been working day and night to realize this mission, and of course, all of you participants. So we are very grateful and thankful. In line with the objective of the conference, I hope and also demand all of us to be ambassadors to voice and advocate for the survivors of this spiritual conflict-related sexual violence, to get justice, support, and above all also to end the spiritual siege and de facto humanitarian blockage imposed on these over 7.3 million population of Tigray. So thank you so much, all speakers, moderators, technical committee members, organized committee, and all participants. Thank you also so much, Melita, who has been very instrumental in moderating this conference. GSTS is planning to have actually a series of conferences on various issues, and we hope we will meet soon with another topic. Thank you so much.
Thank you again. GSTS has been a powerful force in speaking up for the people of Tigray in a way that is more accessible and understandable for the diaspora. So we thank you for all that you've done. And thank you everyone who tuned in. Thank you. Please, if you go on Twitter, there has been a hashtag related to our talks today, hashtag Justice for Tigray Women, hashtag IWD 2022. So please, if there's anything you want to share about our conversation today, please make sure that you share it with that hashtag. And we pray for brighter days ahead and more actionable items to come. So thank you all so much for your time.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. Have a good one.
Okay, thank you so much. I think
Thank
Dr.
you. Thank you, everyone.
Rugba, the host is with you, so you can close.
Okay. I don't know how to.
Okay, no problem. Otherwise, we can close it from the source, from the